Thanks for watching Spooky South Coast, and be sure to click the subscribe button and enable notifications with the bell icon to stay up to date with future videos.
And on June 6th, 1966, so 6666, he climbed to the top of the campanile sometime between 9 and midnight, and he jumped to his death, committed suicide, died. And now every 6th of the month, no matter what month it is, between 9 and 12, if you go and you stand at the bottom of the campanile and stare up, you will see the glowing ghost of Paul Rudolph jumping from the top of the campanile. And earlier this week, I had a story up there about the local college here, the local university, UMass Dartmouth. It's the Dartmouth campus of the University of Massachusetts. It was formerly SMU, and it's had a couple of other names in its existence. But I wrote a story about a common urban legend around here, that it was designed by a devil worshiper. And this is something that I looked into when I wrote Ghosts of the South Coast about 8 years ago. And I debunked some of the stories, some of the legends that are out there then. But they still, they still persist. Part of that's probably because, how many people have actually read my book. But there's a lot of, just a lot of durability in this story. That every time that there's a new class of incoming freshmen to UMass Dartmouth, they find out about this, and that just keeps the legend perpetuating.
Right.
And it's one of those things that even if somebody tells you the truth, the story is just so good that you don't want to let it go. And so the way that the story goes, and if you've never seen the campus of UMass Dartmouth, it's kind of hard to explain. Maybe Matt can throw some photos up while we're doing this, but you can just go to umassd.edu and they have pictures of the campus there, or just look up, UMass Dartmouth campus photos on Google Images. It's a very stark stone structure. All of the buildings are concrete, and the whole campus is. Matt's got that's the fame. So from what I understand, Matt, I was told by somebody that the aerial shot kind of makes a pentagram, which is the first I've heard that. But you can see the structure and the style of those buildings with the flat roofs and just the stark, brutal style. It's actually called brutalism, is the architectural style. It's the same style and the same architect that designed Boston City Hall and the J. Edgar Hoover FBI building in Washington, D.C. So anyway, so if you see that image there, you see the campanile in the middle. That's what they call that big needle, which is actually the radio tower for the radio station, but they call that the campanile. It's in the middle of the quad there. And the way that the story goes is that the architect, the designer of the UMass Dartmouth campus, Paul Rudolph, was a Satanist, and that he built UMass Dartmouth to be a portal from hell to earth for Satan to be able to come and carry out his desires here on earth. So the idea was that campanile was supposed to be the way that they would broadcast the message out to all the demons that were around the world.
It's very Harry Potter-like.
Kind of. Although this way predates Harry Potter, because I heard these legends in 1996 when I started going there. So the idea was that Rudolph built this so that Satan would come through. And when he didn't come through, Rudolph was distraught. So he climbed to the top of the campanile. And on June 6th, 1966, so 6666, he climbed to the top of the campanile sometime between 9 and midnight, and he jumped to his death, committed suicide, died. And now every 6th of the month, no matter what month it is, between 9 and 12, if you go and you stand at the bottom of the campanile and stare up, you will see the glowing ghost of Paul Rudolph jumping from the top of the campanile. Now, there's only one small problem with that. Paul Rudolph died in 1997 from cancer after prolonged exposure to asbestos.
Right.
So when I heard this story in 1996, he wasn't even dead yet. So it's the Liberty Valance effect. When the legend becomes fact, print the legend. And that's certainly what's been built up over the years at UMass Dartmouth, because there is some, I don't want to say truth, but there's some aspects of the campus that lend to the credibility of the story. So one of the things that people say is that there's no clocks on the walls because Rudolph didn't want anybody to know what time it was, because when you're inside the walls of these buildings, you were trapped in Satan's prison and the apocalypse was coming and you weren't supposed to know when.
Okay.
That's a little far-fetched, but it's something that people say.
Right.
Another thing that they say is that every staircase on campus is either 13 steps if it's a single staircase, or it's 3 sets of 6s. So if you're going from one floor to another, you'll go up 3 staircases. They all kind of wind in like a column style, so you'll go up 3 sets, 6, 6, and 6. Now, in order to have that count work, you have to count the landing as a step.
Correct.
And that's not really how I would count a staircase. I wouldn't count the landing as a step, but that's how it has to work for that to happen. But the one thing that really gets people going, and Matt's got it up on the screen right now, is that these benches, if you stand in the auditorium building, if you stand there and there's a glass window walkway as you're walking over to the campus center, if you stand there and look out the window, you see these 3 benches that stand as a 6, a 6, and a 6. And what's funny about that is the first day that I was on campus, I was walking from the library to the campus center. I had no idea what I was doing. I think I went once to visit the campus. I was a commuter. I think I went once to visit the campus and just took a quick look around and said, I'll just figure everything out the first day. So I had a free period, so I was kind of wandering around. I was walking from the library to the campus center, and I just saw these benches, and I was like, what are these long walled benches just doing here at the end of these walkways? It doesn't make any sense. It looks weird when you're walking down. And so I went up into the library, and I was looking out the window, and I saw them from there, and I didn't really make anything of it. But then a week or two later, I was walking through the campus center, walking through the auditorium to get to the campus center, and somebody just happened to say, hey, look at the 666s out the window. And when I turned around and looked, I said, oh my God, those benches are 3 6s. And then all of a sudden it made sense as to why that was. And if you look at the staircases, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 steps leading to each of those 6 benches. So we can kind of, debunk a lot of these stories. We can kind of take down some of the mythology about Paul Rudolph, about his death, about some of the rationale behind why he built what he built. But it's really hard to argue with the fact that those benches look like 3 6s, and there's really no explanation as to why they have to look that way. There are other instances around campus of those benches.
Right.
But not in 3 6s like that. You know, where there's like a long wall and then an enclosed area. A lot of the, inside the actual academic buildings, they have lounge areas where it's the same idea. It's like a long wall of benches that kind of curls around into an alcove, but it's not 6s like that. And everybody keeps saying that too when we put the photo up that Eileen just mentioned in the chat room. It could be a 999 if you're looking at it from the other side. But the way that the campus is set up, you don't look at it from the other side.
Right.
There's a whole space of quad in front of you. You can see it from the library, but it's kind of far away. So all the quad is in front of you. The way that it's set up is right in front of the auditorium building. You see those 3 6s.
Right.
So it was made to be viewed from that angle.
Yes, it was.
And if it was 999, then that just means that all the phones in New Bedford are just telephones to hell.
It's very true.
Right? Like, because that's the New Bedford telephone exchange. But I certainly think that the legend is not going to go anywhere. I mean, it hasn't in the 22 years since I started at UMass Dartmouth. It hasn't in the 8 years since I wrote my book that maybe a few people have read. And
I did.
The story is just always going to be out there. And the story is always going to be better than the truth.
I'd love to know if it's still happening now.
Well, we actually, I wrote the story on, I think, Wednesday. And then Thursday morning, I popped in on the Fun 107 morning show because they wanted to talk to me about the story. And they had their intern, Monica, who's a UMass Dartmouth student, and she had never heard any of these stories.
Oh, really?
So
maybe it's died off.
But people, you put it up online, there's people like, oh yeah, no, I heard that story. Like, oh, I'm still hearing that story today. But just Monica had not heard that story. So, maybe it's not that prevalent.
Right.
When I was there, the Torch wrote a story about it. I know the Torch wrote a later story about it because there's one from like 2007 or something online. South Coast 24/7, when that was in existence, wrote a story about it. So there's been enough attention to those legends over the years that it's kind of stuck around.
I know in my days of going to UMass Dartmouth, everything was haunted. Anybody you talk to, the dorms were haunted. Certain dorms were super haunted. Other ones, had these crazy stories of, just suicides and horrible stories and things coming from the woods and everything else.
There's like that, though, in most college campuses around here, especially, when you're dealing with the schools in the Bridgewater Triangle, like Stonehill College or Bridgewater State University. Bridgewater State
is
has
very haunted.
Ridiculous stories coming out of it. And to the point where, I know kids that have gone there to live there that have become commuters because they couldn't deal with the stuff that was going on in the dorms.
Right.
And Stonehill too. The same. Look at, as we're talking about Boston City Hall, they about the brutalism. They put Boston City Hall up on the TV screen behind us. But there's there's people that have gone to Stonehill too that have said I had to transfer out of there because so much weird stuff was happening. So I'm sure that schools and universities and colleges will always kind of have a high level of activity anyway, because.
Well, the amount of people coming in and out constantly and the different energies and everything else.
The energy they're expelling.
Exactly.
It's what's leaving its mark.
Yep.
So it doesn't have to be a tragedy that happens there.
Right.
There doesn't have to be a...
But when a tragedy does happen, I think it amplifies everything.
Sure. Right. For example, I don't want to speak too much about this because it's still so fresh in people's minds. But folks might not be aware of this, but Zokhar Tsarnaev was a UMass Dartmouth student.
Correct.
And so he was kind of tied into the campus community there, and some of the people that were associates of his were also students there. So there was kind of talk that there was some sort of dark connection there because of this story, these legends that are out there that turn out probably not to be true about Rudolph, but some people were kind of tying that into what happened with the Boston Marathon bombing. So the story will always live on as long as there's somebody that's around to tell it.